Hey Heather, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Amin. It's good to be here.
Awesome. So today we're going to be talking about looking back to look forward when it comes to branding.
I'm so excited about this topic. There are some beautiful things that we can find, little trinkets and treasures in the past that help us to understand where we've been so we can define where we want to go with our brands.
That's wonderful. Yeah. And I'm really looking forward to this episode as well because you're going to share some really interesting facts about where branding came from.
Yeah, one of my biggest heroes in branding, Debbie Millman, has a great course where she talks about limbic branding and where she talks about the Great Leap. And if you watch her TED Talk, she unpacks this Great Leap forward. So it's one of the most significant times in history when our brains evolved and we started to need symbols. And so this became, about 50,000 years ago when people started to make tools and they started to do cave paintings. So those cave paintings were really important because they told the story of battles. They told the story of where hunting grounds were. They talked about family systems and the animals in the area. Those are really important beginning pieces of narrative and mark making. It's also around the time when people started to use makeup. And believe it or not, it was actually men. I mean, do you do your makeup today?
I did my hair today.
You did your hair today. Perfect. Yeah, so men would use it, and it would be a way of identifying which family structure you're from or which belief systems you had. And then flags started to be used. And in battles, flags were used to identify which team was which team. And so there became colors and mark making and the need to tie yourself to a community and to make it visually obvious where you belonged. And so that's a really interesting jumping off point when we start to think about branding and how human it is to be able to tie yourself to marks.
So that's really interesting because I think what I'm hearing is that branding and the idea of having a mark actually came from a safety standpoint initially, where if you were part of a tribe that was battling another tribe, if you didn't know where you belonged, well, you could get hurt.
Definitely, you needed to know who was yours and who was not. And, our brains naturally have some of that ability. But when it's obvious, like if you think about a street sign, if I see a street sign, I know I'm turning in the right spot. Yeah, so it kind of is a system of efficiency as well.
Right. And if you're talking about 50,000 years ago, there may not have been a system of writing in letters and words. So I can see the importance of how branding would be really critical at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting when we start to move into some of the contemporary scene, and we'll talk more about the contemporary scene coming up, but there is a really important time for brands in 1876, where in North America, their first trademarks were established. So then people attached laws to their marks and to their logos. And the very first brand to officially register was Bass Ale. And something that's
Awesome.
really interesting about Bass Ale, so this is a brewery from Europe. The thing that was really interesting is it was also the first product placement.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
And if people don't know what product placement is, do you want to explain that really quick?
Well, product placement is where a brand pays to be featured. So it's like an advertisement so that a brand can tie itself to an idea, like in a movie. You might see somebody using an Apple computer
Mhm.
or driving a Tesla, for example. And so oftentimes those companies will pay for that placement. So we see Bass Ale in a Rembrandt painting.
That's awesome.
So we'll post that painting as well. But it's just really interesting because that's where the big jumping off point came for all of these really rich advertisements and posters. And if you're like me and you love to look at vintage sign painting, that's where it's just a really beautiful season in branding and the kind of the origin points for setting us up for where we are today in a contemporary scene.
That's really cool. And can you talk a little bit about the idea of a brand, like how the term came about?
Well, the term branding actually comes from the term to sear in, and we're going to dive deep into that into the next episode. So if you want more, you'll have to stay tuned.
That's going to be really interesting because there's some really fun facts that you probably didn't know about when it comes to branding.
So when we take a look back at where brands came from and our need to identify and to mark things. It gives us an understanding of where we can go with our brands and why they're so important. It's not just something you get on Fiverr and there you have a brand. There's a whole spirit and a soul and a reason for everything when it comes to your brand.
Thanks so much for that summary, Heather. Tomorrow on our show, we're going to be going down a journey down the Silk Road and learning some interesting facts. So join us tomorrow.